which is typical of early royalty. When I mention this to Korean audiences, they go, oh, 징그럽다. Hello everyone, this is Mark Peterson again with the Frog Outside the Well Research Center, and today my guest, Professor Richard McBride, my good friend Rick here. Rick teaches at BYU. In fact, he took the place I had when I retired at BYU. Before that, he was at BYU Hawaii. Before that, at Washington University in St. Louis. And Rick has a tremendous academic record, a lot of publications, and he's a specialist in Shilla. And I thought today we might talk about some of my questions about Shilla. And one of the things that I like to talk about is the peaceful tradition of Korean history, the stable tradition of Korean history. And this counters the way most Koreans look at their history as full of turmoil and war and invasions, that sort of thing. Now, of course, there was more turmoil and war during the Shilla period, especially up till unification. But even then, the Shilla dynasty lasted a long time. Going back to its mythological roots, it ran about 1,000 years, which, you know, you may not be able to count all those early years, but from unification on, it lasted 267 years.
Even if you count from the mid-4th century, that's still
a long dynasty.
Long time.
Longer than most dynasties in the world, which I argue is one of the hallmarks of Korean history, is these long dynasties. I mean, Baekje, Goryeo lasted 600 years. Goryeo lasted 500 and Joseon lasted 500. Other countries, the dynasty averages 250 years, 200 to 300 years.
At best.
China and Japan and anywhere in the world. So Korea has this long dynasty tradition. Another thing that I'd like Rick to help me out today with is the way Shilla absorbed Kaya. And I see this as a pattern of Korean history that is a peaceful absorption, peaceful conquest. Now, of course, there was some war. There was some bloodshed. It wasn't Sunday afternoon tea. But still, you find the royalty of Kaya showing up intermarrying with the royalty of Shilla, which is a remarkable thing. And Kim Yushin is the best example of this. Kim Yushin's, was it grandfather or great-grandfather, was one of the last Kaya generals.
His great-grandfather, Kim Gu-hae, was the ruler of Kaya that submitted to and sort of basically surrendered his state and brought his seals and surrendered his state to King Bapung in the year 532, Kumgwang Kaya. In Kim-hae. And then his grandfather, Kim Muryak, was one of the early Kaya people to become a high-ranking official in the Shilla government. And he ultimately became a kakkan, and he was a very important figure. Kim Yushin's father and Kim Yushin himself, with the conquest of the Han River Basin near present-day Seoul, this is where his family sort of came to the fore, and his family was posted there to protect that region
as military leaders.
As military.
In fact, another way to look at it, you looked at the governmental ranks, but there's the social rank of the Sanggol, Chingol, and the Yukdukul.
Right.
And this is an amazing thing to me, that a conquered country has representatives that are in the Sanggol.
Well, they weren't in the Sanggol. We have one on, and it's right in the 6th century when the evidence suggests that you really get Sanggol, Jingol, and all this stuff emerging as well. So what happens is the Sanggol is the family, the royal family of Shilla. And so people like King Bapung and King Jinung and their descendants, and they're intermarrying with their close relatives, and they are Sanggol. But then the Jingol are other members of the royal family. So what is very interesting, and this is, you're absolutely right about this, that when Kim Gu-hae submits to Shilla, immediately the Shilla king turns around and makes him a Sangdong, which essentially he makes him part of the Council of Nobles in Shilla. And members of the Council of Nobles of Shilla primarily are Jingol. And so they start out as Jingol from the very beginning. You have to be at least Jingol to be able to rise up into these high ranks. And so Kim Muryak, their position is kind of solidified. And so what gets very interesting then is sort of this interrelationship. And it really only happens, later in the 7th century that you get descendants of the royal family of Kaya, at least one branch of that, intermarrying with what will become a new royal family of Shilla with Kim Chun-chu.
So then Kim Yushin's sister ends up marrying Kim Chun-chu, who eventually becomes the king, and they have a child, a daughter,
and that daughter is then married to Kim Yushin.
Incredible close relative marriage, which is typical of early royalty. When I mention this to Korean audiences, they go, "Oh, jingeropda," because she's marrying her uncle. But that's the way it was with early royalty. So here again, though, the idea that this is a kaya man. I said Sungol a minute ago because I assumed that marrying the king made him Sungol, but it's true. No. Chingol and Sungol can intermarry.
Chingol and Sungol can intermarry, but their descendants will be Chingol. You always take what's less. Even Kim Chun-chu wasn't Sungol. He was Chingol. All the records say that he's Chingol.
Well, eventually Sungol completely dies out.
Yeah, the Sungol, the holy bone or the hallowed bone, dies out with Queen Jinduk, who you have these two queens at the very end who are the last two holy bone rulers.
Oh, they're holy bone.
They're holy bone. But they don't have any
heir.
They don't have any heirs. The Shilla records don't talk about them having any official consorts, and they don't have any heirs. Things kind of die out. Now, whether it was because there were problems with so much intermarriage having happened, it's hard to say.
That's the rule for royal families. We say that they die themselves off. Well, the point, though, that I find interesting is that this is a Kaya man from a Kaya lineage who ends up at the very top of the Shilla aristocracy.
Not only that, is he becomes a Hwarang at age 15, and he becomes a great general. He is the close
Unification General.
Yeah, well, unification or conquest, that's the great story, right? I mean, unification has been the story for a long time, but Shilla was a conquest dynasty. Even after that, he is posthumously made king, and he's King Hungmu.
It's very complicated, and the history is a little bit shadowy. We have records written well after the fact, the Samguk Sagi, Samguk Yusa. But the point that I like to make is that this consolidation of Kaya and Shilla represents this first relatively peaceful consolidation, which is followed by the Koryo absorption of Shilla at the fall of Shilla, and when Koryo becomes the protectorate of Shilla against Hupekje. And then I argue this continues on when Chosun supplants Koryo. When Isangye takes over, I like to make the argument that it wasn't a fight of many years or even many decades, the way most falls of dynasty are, but Isangye took over in one afternoon.
One of my former professors, John Duncan, wrote an interesting paper. We have no real evidence of Koguryo surnames in Korea. Koryo bought into its origins as a Shilla state now, and they're the successors to Shilla. And the families, they see themselves dating back to the Shilla period, and those families, their legitimacy is based upon Shilla.
And all of our surnames, most of our surnames, come from the Shilla period. So that's a really interesting tradition. Well, we're out of time, and I want to thank Professor McBride for coming in today and sharing his, as you can see, vast knowledge on the Shilla period. And we'll hope to have you in again sometime in the future. Thanks for this time.
Well, thanks for having me.
You bet. We'll see you next time.